What if someone told you that in the spring of 2026, the world's most powerful governments were quietly hoping India would break? Not through a war aimed at India, not through sanctions against India, not through any diplomatic move designed to bring India down, but through something more subtle but calculated, something more cruel, a conflict between other nations, over other interests, in a region India had nothing to do with. But India felt its impact almost immediately, because of a single narrow waterway 21 miles wide that carries half of India's energy supply, and overnight that waterway closed. India did not cause this crisis. India did not deserve this crisis. India simply found itself once again in the position that large, rising nations have always found themselves in, caught in the consequences of other people's decisions, with no choice but to navigate through. And here is where the story gets interesting, because the way India is navigating 2026, the decisions made, the ground held, the things built quietly while the storm was loudest, says more about where this country is going than any single good year ever could. This is the story of 2026. Not a story of India being targeted, but a story of India being tested by circumstance, by geography, by the brutal arithmetic of global energy dependence, and refusing to break. What actually happened is surprising, because the people who designed the pressure test made the same mistake the British Empire made. The same mistake the nuclear suppliers group made when they cut off India's access to atomic technology after 1974. The same mistake every outside power has made since the British East India Company first landed on this subcontinent with a ledger in one hand and a rifle in the other. They underestimated what India does when it is pushed into a corner. This is the story of 2026, the year the world tried to slow India down, and the year India showed once again that this ancient and extraordinary civilization was not built for submission. According to verified data from CNBC and international energy analysts, India depends on the Strait of Hormuz for approximately 50% of its crude oil imports, 60% of its liquefied natural gas, and nearly all of its LPG supplies. February 28, 2026. The United States and Israel launch coordinated military strikes on Iran. When Iran responds to the strikes by blocking the strait, India feels it within weeks. On paper, India looks exposed. It is not the first time in Indian history that the country has looked exposed on paper. But it will also not be the last time India proves that the paper is completely wrong. In May 1974, India conducted its first nuclear test in the Rajasthan desert. The response from the world's established nuclear powers was immediate. The United States, Canada, and their allies formed the Nuclear Suppliers Group, one that controlled access to nuclear materials, equipment, and expertise, and used that control to punish India for developing its own nuclear capability. The sanctions did not stop at reactors or uranium. They went further. Western nations refused to sell India basic industrial components, valves, sensors, pumps, measuring instruments that could be found in any factory anywhere in the developed world. They refused to sell India a valve, a piece of industrial plumbing. Refused, because they were afraid of what India might build if given the tools. What India did next is the part that the Nuclear Suppliers Group did not plan for. India built the tools itself. For 22 years, Indian engineers worked on the Fast Breeder Reactor with whatever they could make domestically. Larsen and Toubro contributed components of extraordinary precision. Bharat Forge, better known as an automotive supplier, manufactured nuclear-grade forgings that international experts had declared impossible to produce outside specialized Western facilities. Hundreds of Indian companies made the parts that no foreign supplier would sell. Every valve was Indian, every sodium pipe weld was made by Indian hands, every sensor was calibrated by an Indian scientist. The total project cost, according to India's Parliamentary Standing Committee, was approximately 8,181 crore rupees, roughly $3.9 billion in purchasing power terms. That is less than one-third of what Japan alone spent on a fast breeder program it ultimately abandoned. The nations that tried to stop India from building this machine were not acting from moral authority. They were acting from competitive self-interest. They did not want an energy-independent India. Because an India that does not need their fuel, does not need their technology, does not need their permission to keep its lights on, is an India that can look the world's most powerful nations in the eye as a genuine equal. And powerful nations, historically, do not enjoy the company of newly equal peers. They tried to bury this dream by refusing to sell a valve. India built a reactor. On the evening of April 6, 2026, at 8:25 Indian Standard Time, inside a heavily secured facility on the Tamil Nadu coast at Kalpakkam, something extraordinary happened. According to official statements from India's Department of Atomic Energy, confirmed by the International Atomic Energy Agency, and reported by The Wire and Down to Earth, the 500-megawatt prototype Fast Breeder Reactor at Kalpakkam achieved first criticality on April 6, 2026. The point at which a nuclear reactor's chain reaction becomes fully self-sustaining is called criticality. The IAEA Director General Rafael Grossi publicly called it impressive progress in fuel sustainability and congratulated Prime Minister Modi directly. India had just become only the second country in the world, after Russia, to successfully operate a fast breeder reactor at this scale. Not the United States, not France, not Japan, which spent $12 billion on its own fast breeder program before shutting it down permanently without generating meaningful power, not Germany, not the United Kingdom, but India and Russia. Why does this matter in this story? Because the Iran war made one thing brutally clear to every Indian who was paying attention. India is held hostage to decisions made in foreign capitals, over foreign conflicts, on waterways India does not control. The Kalpakkam reactor is India's long answer to that vulnerability, a machine that creates more fuel than it burns, an answer to the Strait of Hormuz that is not diplomatic, not transactional, not dependent on any foreign relationship remaining friendly. It is an engineering answer, built by Indian hands from Indian design on Indian soil. The world spent decades telling India that this machine was impossible. India built it anyway. In 2026, India also holds the BRICS chairmanship. The bloc now spans 17 nations: Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, Iran, the UAE, Indonesia, Egypt, Ethiopia, and more. It covers almost every ideology, every geopolitical position, every side of every current conflict. When the U.S. and Israel struck Iran on February 28th, India found itself in a position that would have frozen most governments in place. Iran is a BRICS member. The UAE, which was struck by Iranian retaliatory attacks, is also a BRICS member. Russia, China, Brazil, and South Africa quickly condemned the original U.S.-Israeli strikes. India, as the BRICS chair, said almost nothing in public. The international press wrote that India's silence was proof of weakness, that it lacked the courage to take a position. They had it completely backwards. Think about what India was actually doing. At the moment when 17 nations, with deeply incompatible interests, could have shattered the entire BRICS framework permanently, India was holding the chair, keeping every single party at the table, not allowing the bloc to collapse into rival camps, which would have ended any possibility of a negotiated outcome. In May 2026, India hosted the BRICS foreign ministers meeting in New Delhi. Iran's foreign minister was in the room. The UAE's position was on the table. Russia and China and Brazil were all present. External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar called publicly for safe, unimpeded maritime flows through the Strait of Hormuz. In ordinary diplomatic language, that sentence sounds like nothing. In the context of 2026, it was a precisely aimed message. India was telling Iran, through the one international framework Iran valued and depended on, that the strait needed to reopen, without pointing a finger that would have blown up the entire summit and destroyed the possibility of further talks. The countries that were loudly condemning each other in press releases were generating headlines. India was working toward outcomes. That is the difference between noise and statecraft. Strategic autonomy, the principle that India maintains genuine working relationships on every side of every major global divide, is not a recent idea. The logic is simple. A country that is owned by one side cannot be trusted by any other. A country that is nobody's servant can be everybody's partner. In a world dividing fast into hostile camps, That position is not weakness. It is the most valuable diplomatic real estate on the planet. 2026 is the hardest test that doctrine has faced in a generation. India is definitely passing it. Here is the single number that critics of India's 2026 story consistently bury at the bottom of their analysis, if they mention it at all. India's GDP growth for the financial year 2025 to 26 was 7.6%. 7.6%, in the middle of the worst energy shock in a generation, while the rupee was hitting record lows, while $20 billion was leaving Indian equity markets, while fuel prices were climbing and fertilizer was under pressure, and every foreign commentator was writing pieces about India's vulnerabilities. 7.6%. According to the OECD's March 2026 Interim Economic Outlook, India remained the world's fastest-growing major economy. The IMF confirmed it. The World Bank confirmed it. India's own economic survey, tabled in Parliament, confirmed it, and noted that it was the fourth consecutive year India held that position. That number does not come from luck. It does not come from a single good quarter or one-off government spending. It comes from 12 years of infrastructure investment that is now producing compounding returns. The national highways that reduce travel times between cities by hours. The new ports that cut export logistics costs. The airports that connected Tier 2 and Tier 3 Indian cities to global commerce for the first time. The Aadhaar biometric identity system that brought hundreds of millions of Indians into the formal economy. The UPI digital payments platform processed billions of transactions every month, and according to official data, adopted or studied by more than 50 countries around the world. This is what genuine structural investment looks like when it matures. And beneath the headline number, something even more significant is happening in the factories and warehouses of Tamil Nadu, Telangana, and Karnataka. Apple, and the most valuable company in the world, exported more than $50 billion worth of iPhones from India through the calendar year 2025, according to verified reporting from Manufacturing Today and Technology Magazine. 1 in every 4 iPhones assembled anywhere on the planet is now assembled in India. Apple is reportedly targeting the majority of iPhones sold in the United States to come from Indian factories by end of 2026. In the second quarter of 2025, India became the top exporter of smartphones to the United States, with Indian-assembled devices accounting for 44% of all U.S. smartphone imports. Smartphones overtook petroleum products to become India's single largest export category, a fact that would have seemed impossible 5 years ago. This is what Make in India looks like when it actually works. The Bengal breakthrough. In the middle of all of this, the energy shock, the falling rupee, the BRICS tightrope, the Pakistan irritation, the $20 billion leaving Indian markets, Modi's BJP contests is state elections in 5 states and delivers results that will be studied in Indian politics for decades. In Assam, a 3rd consecutive term. This is a state that a generation ago was defined by insurgency, ethnic tension, and federal neglect so complete that entire communities have been written off by the old political establishment. Today it is one of the BJP's most secure strongholds, built not on slogans but on roads, connectivity, and governance that actually reach the people who needed it. Then West Bengal. Understand what West Bengal means in Indian political history. Bloomberg reported that analysts at the Asia Group described it as a much-needed win that gives PM Modi the capital to make the hard economic decisions that coalition governments typically cannot make. Raising energy prices to reflect market reality, rationalizing subsidies, pushing structural reforms, land, labor, ease of business that have stalled for years. This state was governed by the Communist Party of India for 34 consecutive years. 34 years. One party, one machine, one ideological grip on one of India's most populous, most culturally significant, most politically watched states. When the left finally fell in 2011, it was not replaced by the BJP. It was replaced by Mamata Banerjee's Trinamool Congress, a force backed by one of the most formidable street-level political organizations in the country, with deep roots across every district, every community, every lane. The BJP had never governed West Bengal, Not once. The state was not just an opposition stronghold, it was an argument, a living proof, repeated every election cycle, that there were places in India where Modi's politics simply did not work, where the formula failed, where the machine stopped. According to verified reporting from NPR and Bloomberg, in May 2026, in the middle of an energy crisis, with a weakened currency and $20 billion leaving Indian markets, the BJP won West Bengal for the first time in the party's history in the state. That is not a political victory, that is a civilizational statement. It says something about what the Indian people do when their country faces a genuine external storm. They do not turn on their leadership. They do not panic. They look for the government that has built things they can see and use and trust. That asks them to face the difficulty together rather than pretending it was not happening. The semiconductor bet. In the middle of 2026's storms, something amazing is happening in the design centers and laboratories of Bengaluru, Hyderabad, and Pune. India announces that it will produce its first domestically designed semiconductor chips. The international reaction is careful, measured, politely skeptical. Analysts note, correctly, that India is starting with trailing-edge chips, older designs, the kind that power appliances and industrial equipment, not the cutting-edge processors driving artificial intelligence or advanced military systems. Compared to what TSMC in Taiwan or Samsung in South Korea are doing at the very frontier of fabrication, India's announcement barely registers in the global technology press. They are making the same mistake that every outside observer made about India's nuclear program in 1974. Every nation that became a semiconductor power started with trailing-edge chips. Taiwan started there. South Korea's Samsung started by making chips for calculators and digital watches. The journey from trailing edge to the frontier is not a single leap. It is a staircase, built over decades, one step at a time. And this time, unlike the nuclear program, there is no nuclear suppliers group to block the path, no cartel to deny components, no international body to sanction ambition. The chip design talent is already inside India. Tens of thousands of engineers who have spent careers designing semiconductors for Intel, Qualcomm, and AMD. They know exactly how the world's most advanced chips work. They have been building them for decades. The road to 2047, past the energy crisis, past the elections, past the BRICS meetings, and the rupee data, and the weekly news cycle. Past all of it. Look at what India is actually building, and what it will look like in 20 years. By 2047, the 100th anniversary of Indian independence, India has set a target of 100 gigawatts of nuclear power. An energy grid running on Indian fuel from Indian soil, requiring no foreign permission to keep the lights on. A manufacturing sector that employs tens of millions of young Indians in real, skilled, dignified work. A semiconductor industry that started trailing edge and will, within a generation, compete at the frontier. A foreign policy so grounded in genuine strategic weight, military, economic, demographic, technological, that strategic autonomy stops being a doctrine India has to defend and simply becomes a reality the world accepts. What does 100 gigawatts of clean, indigenously fueled nuclear energy mean for the average Indian in 2047? It means the electricity in their home does not depend on whether a war breaks out near a distant strait. It means India's economy cannot be squeezed by decisions made in foreign capitals about foreign conflicts. It means the lever that the powerful have always used against the rising energy dependency no longer works on India. That is not an energy target. That is the declaration of permanent strategic independence that every decision in 2026 is building toward. The prototype Fast Breeder Reactor at Kalpakkam is not the destination. It is the proof. The proof that Stage 2 works, that the machine breeds its own fuel, that the next generation of thorium reactors, Stage 3 of a plan first sketched in the 1950s, is now achievable. The civilizational project does not move at the speed of a news cycle. It moves at the speed of a civilization that has been here for 5,000 years and intends to be here for 5,000 more. India's answer. India in 2026 is not a country in crisis. Let the hedge funds and the foreign policy commentators write their carefully hedged assessments of India's vulnerabilities. Let them note the FDI outflows, the rupee pressure, the BRICS statements that were not issued. Let them point out, correctly, that structural reforms on land and labor and the ease of doing business remain unfinished work. All of that is true. All of it is worth saying. Here is what else is true. India is the world's fastest growing major economy for the fourth consecutive year. Its GDP grew at 7.6% in FY26, confirmed by the OECD, IMF, and World Bank, in the middle of the worst energy shock in a generation. India has 1.4 billion people with a median age of 28, the largest, youngest major workforce anywhere on the planet. A generation entering the economy exactly when the Make in India project is beginning to deliver real results. Not in press releases, but in $50 billion iPhone export numbers and 44% U.S. smartphone import market share. India has democratic institutions that just survived a genuine stress test. A 2024 election where the ruling party did not win in the way it expected to, and the system absorbed it without crisis. That is not a weakness. That is democracy working exactly as designed. India has a prime minister who won 3 straight national elections, won West Bengal in the middle of an economic storm, and chose to tell 1.4 billion people the truth about what their country was facing, at a moment when the politically easier choice would have been comfortable silence. India has engineers who built a fast breeder reactor that France, Japan, Germany, and the United States could not, at a fraction of the cost. Without the components, the world refused to sell them. Without the technical assistance, the world refused to provide. And India has something that no index can measure, no quarterly report can capture, and no cartel of nations has ever successfully taken away. It has the memory of what it survived to get here. Every Indian alive today carries the knowledge, not abstract, not textbook, but bone deep and personal, of what 2 centuries of colonial rule cost this land. Every family has a version of that story, and that knowledge creates a particular kind of determination that outside powers have always fatally underestimated. Because it does not shout, it does not hold press conferences, it does not issue ultimatums, it simply keeps building. When the British left in 1947, India had virtually no heavy industry, no domestic steel, no nuclear science, no integrated infrastructure, no digital anything. An economy that had been systematically dismantled and looted for 200 years. In 77 years since independence, India built the world's 4th largest economy, on track to become 3rd largest by 2030, the world's largest democracy, a nuclear program that succeeded where France and Japan failed, a digital payment network that the United States Federal Reserve is studying, a fast breeder reactor that only Russia has matched, a space program that landed on the moon's south pole before any other nation on Earth. And in 2026, in the middle of the hardest storm this generation of Indian leaders has faced, the economy is still growing faster than almost anyone else on the planet. The elections are still being won, the chips are being designed, the reactor is breeding fuel, the factories are assembling iPhones, the trade deals are being signed, the infrastructure is compounding. The table that powerful nations once refused to let India sit at, it is being hosted in New Delhi. The world did not target India in 2026. The world did not need to. The circumstances were enough, and India navigated every single one of them. India is not broken. India is building. So there it is, the full verified picture of why 2026 is India's most consequential year in a generation. And why the easy narrative of crisis, of exposure, of a rising power stumbling, gets it so completely wrong. Yes, there is a real energy shock. Yes, the rupee is under pressure. Yes, the BRICS chairmanship is a diplomatic tightrope. Yes, Pakistan had a moment. Yes, foreign investors were cautious. Yes, structural reforms remain unfinished. All of that is true and fair to say. Also true, a prime minister who stepped into a storm and chose honesty over comfortable silence. An election result in West Bengal that will be written about in political science courses for decades. a GDP growing at 7.6% in a global energy crisis, a nuclear reactor achieving criticality, making India only the second nation on Earth to reach that milestone. $50 billion of iPhone exports from Indian factories, the world's fastest growing major economy for the fourth consecutive year running. This is what a great civilization looks like in the middle of its most important chapter. Not triumphant, not effortless, not free from difficult mornings and hard questions, but moving, always building, refusing, as it has always refused, through every empire and every sanction and every external pressure, to accept that someone else gets to decide its ceiling. The world's circumstances tested India in 2026. 2026 is India's answer. If this video gave you a new perspective on where India stands today, share it with someone who still sees India through an outdated lens. Because something profound is happening in India. A civilization that spent decades doubting itself is beginning to rediscover its confidence. Not through slogans, not through noise, but through infrastructure, technology, diplomacy, manufacturing, science, energy, and strategic patience. And none of this happens overnight. Every metro line, every reactor, every semiconductor facility, every highway, every satellite launch, every port, every indigenous breakthrough is built by millions of ordinary Indians quietly doing extraordinary work every single day. To everyone who watches these videos regularly, comments thoughtfully, shares them with others, and helps these conversations grow, genuinely thank you. This channel exists because of people who care deeply about understanding where India is heading, beyond headlines and political noise. The goal here is not blind praise, it is perspective. To look at India honestly, its strengths, its flaws, its challenges, and its rise with depth and context. Because whether people realize it or not, the decisions India makes in this decade will shape far more than just India. We are living through one of the most important geopolitical shifts of the 21st century, and together we're documenting it in real time. Subscribe if you want more deeply researched videos on geopolitics, infrastructure, technology, strategy, and the forces shaping India's future. Stay curious, stay grounded, stay proud, and keep watching.